Hey everyone, Stephen Wagner here, President of Digitally Accurate, Omnissa Tech Insider, VMware vExpert, and I'm also part of the NVIDIA NEPA, the Enterprise Platform Advisor Group. Today, I'm doing a video and a blog post on something super important. We have the Windows 10 end of life coming up. I think it's October 14th, 2025. And a lot of organizations right now are really struggling to get Windows 11 deployed in their VDI environments. Now, this is happening for a whole bunch of different reasons. Windows 11 has some requirements as far as vTPM goes. A lot of companies don't know how to handle this, or they're doing it improperly. And over the years, I've helped quite a few of my customers correct their Windows 11 deployments. So I thought I would do a video that just kind of outlines the entire process, goes over some best practices, and essentially I'm going to show you how to create a Windows 11 Golden Image. So before we get started, I'm going to do a screen share here shortly. There's a couple things I want to go over. So there were two phases to this deployment. Phase one is you have to use Windows ADK and WinPE to essentially create like a pre-stage, a pre-boot environment. And so you'll create an ISO that you'll essentially bootstrap your Windows deployment. And with this WinPE ISO, you'll be able to install Windows 11 without a vTPM. And it'll get you over to the point where you can jump over to the Omnissa Tech Zone article that covers on how to manually create a golden image. And so once we create that ISO, we can create a virtual machine on VMware vSphere. We'll be able to attach the WinPE ISO, the Windows 11 ISO, and we'll be able to get to the point where you can start doing the Horizon agent installation, application installation, DEM, app volumes, all that fun stuff. Now, a couple other things I want to mention here too is that this process can be used both for your instant clone golden images and also your persistent VM templates. We're going to be referencing two documents. I already mentioned the Omnissa Tech Zone article covering the manual base image creation. Broadcom has a separate article that goes over in detail how to create a Windows 11 template without a vTPM so that you can clone it. So in theory, with what we cover today, you'll be in a good position where you can create templates for persistent VMs and also golden images for instant clones. So with all that being said, I guess we can get started here. So there's two posts that we want to be looking at. So the first article that we're going to be going over here is the Broadcom knowledge base article that essentially tells us how to deploy Windows 11 in a virtual machine using a bootable WinPE image. We've got some very easy to follow instructions and then some sample files that we'll need to use for the deployment. Once we create that and we actually create the virtual machine, we'll have to jump over to the Omnissa Tech Zone article, which will cover pretty much everything else as far as installing applications and all that fun stuff along with deployment. So a couple other things to keep in mind here as well is that because we have the additional workflow, we are going to need to deviate from the Broadcom article just slightly, and we're also going to have to deviate from the Omnissa Tech Zone article slightly. So I guess we can get started. So when we start looking at the Broadcom article, the first thing it says is to download and install the Windows ADK. So we're going to go ahead, jump over to this website, and here on Microsoft's website, we'll be able to download the ADK dated December 2024. Now, one thing that's really interesting is that when we download the ADK, you can see here that this is going to be applicable for Windows 11 25H2, 24H2, and earlier supported versions. So when we create this WinPE ISO, we'll be able to use it with 25H2 and earlier Windows ISOs. So in theory, when 25H2 comes out, when it becomes supported on all the interoperability with the different products, you'll be able to use the same ISO for that. However, when 26H2 comes out, you won't be able to use that and you'll have to recreate it. So to get started here, we're just going to go ahead and download the Windows ADK and also the WinPE add-on. And we'll just start installing these. Now for the ADK, they have all this stuff that's automatically checked. I usually just jump in here. I've never actually tested how much stuff you need, but I usually just leave it with deployment tools, hit install, and for the most part it works out pretty good. And of course you need administrative access. And on top of that, you need to know your password. And once the Windows ADK is done, we can go ahead and install the WinPE add-on. Now this is a little bit of a larger package. We're sitting at about 3.8 gigabytes to install the WinPE add-on. And so that's all done, so we can continue. Now, one thing to note is that if you have modified, you can essentially install the Windows ADK onto any system. You can do it on your desktop, you can do it into a temporary VM. The big thing is that we just need a workspace that we can work with to generate that ISO file. Once that's completed, we won't need to use it again until a new version comes out where, 26H2 or something like that. Now, if you've modified your system recovery partition, there is a high possibility that either the install will fail, or with some of the steps that we're about to perform, they will be unsuccessful. So just keep that in mind. I'm using a VM right now that's essentially clean for the most part. It's just a Windows 11 install with some other applications. So now that we've completed that, we will start running through these steps here. So we're going to create our working directories. So they use test inside of the guide. I'm actually going to create something called Win11 inside of the C drive. Now it says to create WinPE mount drivers and scripts. You'll notice in the next command that we have to run this to the WinPE folder. One thing that's kind of funny is that if you create this, you'll actually get an error. So I'm going to skip creating WinPE and just go straight to mount. Drivers, scripts, and then we're going to open up the start menu, and you'll see something new called Windows Kits, and so we're going to have to run the deployment and imaging tools environment as an administrator. So we're just going to change directories, and we're going to run the commands, changing test to Win11. And of course you need to make sure that you spell the commands properly as well. And this is at the point where if we actually created the WinPE folder, we would be getting an error right now that it can't mount because a folder exists. So it's kind of funny. This knowledge base article over the years has had a couple errors that they've fixed, but there's still a couple like that one. And then I'm just going to get ready to run the command in number 4. Again, we have to change the folders from test to the actual folder that we're using. And now we're at step 5, where we're going to have to take the scripts that Broadcom provides us with. We're going to download these. Something important to note here is that you'll notice that it references copying an unattend.xml. So if this is where we have to deviate from the guide, if we copy over the unattend.xml, this will cause WinPE to do a fully unattended Windows 11 installation, which means that we will not be able to put the VM into audit mode. We will not be able to make any customizations. And so this is where we actually have to deviate from this guide. And instead of taking all 4 scripts, we're going to take 3 minus the unattend, and we're going to copy those into the scripts folder. And then next up, we're going to change directories into the scripts folder, and we're going to run these copy commands one by one, making sure that we change to reflect the actual folder name. And just say yes to overwrite. And then we'll, like I just mentioned, we're going to skip the unattend. So now jumping to step number 6, I'm not going to cover that inside of this guide. However, one thing I want to note is that with Windows 11 24H2, Microsoft started including the VMXNet 3 and the VMware Paravirtual SCSI drivers inside of the Windows install. So with us performing this, we're going to be creating a Windows 11 24H2 image today. And so we don't need to inject any drivers. However, if you were deploying Windows 11 23H2, which did not include the VMware Paravirtual or the VMXNet 3 drivers, you would actually have to perform these steps inside of 6 to essentially inject the VMware Paravirtual and the VMXNet 3 driver into WinPE so that Windows can be installed and have those drivers. Again, it's outside of the scope of this video, but I just wanted to mention that. And so we'll be able to skip both steps 6 and 7. Number 8, you can make any additional modifications that you would like, and we don't have any, so I guess we can skip 8 as well. And finally, we're at step number 9. Now the thing is, one thing I want to point out with step number 9 is that if you have any windows open, or if you have any command prompts open that you're inside of those directories, these can fail. So you'll notice here that in the background I've got c:/win11/scripts. I'm going to close that. I'm also going to close any other windows, and inside of this deployment and imaging tools environment command prompt, I'm actually just going to change to the C drive because I don't want to have any locks on the Windows 11 folder. Because if DISM can't perform some actions, it will complain and sometimes it gets stuck. So since we don't have anything open in that directory, we'll just, these are 2 separate commands by the way as well. So we're going to go ahead and run this. It's going to unmount the image, and actually it's the unmounting of the image that will fail if you have any folders open inside of that workspace. And then next we could proceed with the second command. This is going to be the command that actually generates the ISO file. Again, we're just changing test to the actual working directory. And one thing I'm going to do here too is I'm going to remove AMD64, and I'm actually going to version this. So as you can remember on the Windows ADK website here, it stated that we were running the December 2024 version. So I'm just going to add December 2024, just so that we know that it works with Windows 11 25H2, 24H2, and earlier versions. And I forgot to update one of the folders, so we'll just quickly fix that. We're going to rerun the command. And so that pretty much completes step one. So if we go to the Windows 11 folder, you'll notice that we now have this WinPE December 2024 ISO. And what you'll need to do at this point is upload this to a data store inside of your VMware vSphere environment, as we'll need to attach it to the VM. So I'll leave you to that. Make sure you get it uploaded, and we'll be starting off phase 2 of the Windows 11 deployment here shortly. Okay, so now we're ready for phase 2, and this is where we're actually going to create the virtual machine and the golden image itself. So we're going to jump over to the VMware vSphere environment, and as you can see, I have a data store that I've created an ISOs folder with, and inside of here I put the WinPE December 2024 ISO that we created, along with one of the later, or could be the latest version of Windows 11 24H2. So we're at the point where we can officially actually create this virtual machine. So we're going to be following the deployment method that's inside of the Tech Zone article for the most part, with some minor modifications. So I'm not going to be going from side to side. I'm going to have a link to that in the blog post and in the description of this video, so you can check it out and do it. But for the most part, we're just going to quickly go through those instructions. So we'll create a new SW11 Gold. Choose our data store, choose the latest version of ESX. Now, one thing to note here is that if you're running vSphere 7, which is going end of life next month in October of 2025, I believe, your only option will be Windows 10, which is completely fine. You can choose Windows 10 and actually install Windows 11 into the image. That's what a lot of companies did that were deploying Windows 11 2 years ago, or 1 to 2 years ago. Now, if you have vSphere 8, you're going to have the option to choose Windows 11. Now, the problem with choosing Windows 11 is that while it is accurate, and while we do want to choose it, the problem is that you'll notice here that it wants to create a vTPM device. And so you just need to make sure that you remove that before the VM gets created, because we do not want to have a vTPM attached to this. So with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and plug in some values here just to get us started. We're going to reserve all guest memory to avoid any vSwap files from being created, which could fill up data stores. It does happen. I've seen it happen with some customer environments. We're going to create a disk, set it to thin provisioned. We're going to change the SCSI controller to VMware Pair Virtual, which is best practice. We're going to go ahead and choose our network and change the network adapter type to VMXNet3, again, best practice. We're going to need to create a second CD-ROM drive. The first CD-ROM we are going to attach to the WinPE ISO. And then the second CD-ROM we are going to attach to the Windows 11 24H2 CD-ROM. We're going to set 128 megabytes of frame buffer on the software video card. We've already removed the vTPM. And of course, we're just going to jump into advanced parameters and set devices.hotplug. Set that to false. And it looks like we're good to go to create this. And so now if we head over to our VMs, we'll see that we've created the SW11 Gold. We're going to open up a remote console. And we're going to power this on. We're going to hit any key to catch the installer. And this is where things are going to differ a little bit from the TechZone article and what you might be used to. So what's happening right now is that the WinPE preboot went ahead and partitioned the drive, set some stuff up, and it's now prompting us to choose the version of Windows 11 that we want to install. So we're going to choose the index of 3 for Windows 11 Enterprise. And using DISM, it's actually provisioning and installing Windows 11 inside of the VM now. And so at this point, we can now start doing what's inside of the TextZone article. So we're not going to choose the language, but we're just going to press Control-Shift-F3, which is going to take the virtual machine into audit mode. And this will allow us to install the Horizon agent, configure the operating system, and get it ready for deployment. Now, I have to warn that it is possible to do this too fast. So for example, when this system reboots into audit mode, the next step inside the guide, I believe, states to shut down the virtual machine. Now, on the first boot, it will be provisioning AppX packages. And so you want to make sure that after restarts, especially on the first restart, that you let the VM sit for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, just so that all the AppX packages can get deployed. And you won't have any issues when you actually push the image. I've had this issue when I do it too fast in my own lab environment. Another thing to note here too is that with the VM being in audit mode, you will get this sysprep tool window pop up. And so you do not want to hit OK. You can either hit the X or hit cancel. And this box will pop up every time the Golden Image boots until we get to the point where we do the generalization with the OSOT tool, the operating system optimization tool from Omnissa. So we're just going to give this a couple minutes. I'm going to prepare my instant clone deployment and provisioning zip file so that we can get all the good bits on there, such as the Horizon agent, the OSOT tool, and other components. And we'll just let this sit and then restart it in a couple seconds. Okay, so the VM's had a couple minutes to sit, so I'm just going to do a nice clean shutdown. And we'll just immediately turn it back on. Again, we're going to hit cancel on here. And while we were waiting earlier, I actually went ahead and I created a zip file for instant clone deployment that has all the bits that I need in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to extract this. And you'll see that I've got everything from the Office Deployment Toolkit to VMware Tools to Horizon, the agent, extras, OSOT, NVIDIA vGPU drivers. I pretty much put everything inside of this package so that I can just copy everything at once over to the VM, nice and neat and tidy. So I'm just going to take those folders and files, and I usually create a directory inside of the Windows folder called IT. And we'll just move everything there and then just remove everything from downloads. So in my environment, I have a proxy doing SSL interception. So I need to install my certificate so I can get internet access. This is for Windows updates and other components. And the first thing that we'll do here is install VMware Tools 12.5.3. So we're going to do a custom installation. We don't use VMware Carbon Black, so I'm going to exclude that. As per the TextZone article, we want to turn off service discovery because it's not needed on instant clones. And we're also going to turn off shadow copy shadow copy services. I'm still waking up. It's Sunday. Now, when this completes, we're going to hit no, we don't want to restart. And we're going to open up an elevated command prompt, and we're going to install .NET 3.5. And then I'm going to shut down and restart the VM. And at this point, we can perform all the Windows updates on the Golden Image. And now that the Windows updates are installed, we can restart. And now that the updates are installed and the system's restarted, we can proceed with the work on the Golden Image. So first things first, I'm just going to go in and remove the OneDrive that comes bundled with Windows 11. And the next steps inside of the TechZone article is that we can now deploy the Horizon agent. I always like to do the majority of the installs from an elevated command prompt. And so we're going to go ahead and install the agent. Making sure that the instant clone agent is enabled, which it is by default, but I always just like to point that out. And then there's other settings in here, such as USB redirection, scanner redirection, that you could choose depending on your deployment, which we won't be getting into in this this guide. I always include the Horizon Performance Tracker because this tool's amazing for troubleshooting. And we'll just automatically restart the system on successful installation. Now at this point, the next steps would be to install the Dynamic Environment Manager agent, which we aren't using, so I'm going to skip that step, which would put us at the point to install applications in the base image. Now I don't want to get into this too much because this would be kind of considered a different lesson. However, I do want to install just a couple applications just to demonstrate the workflow. So what I'll do is I'll just jump into the Office Deployment Toolkit, and I already have a pre-configured XML file for my instant clones, so I'm just going to do setup.exe/download, and I'm going to download the Office installers. And actually, I thought I had more software packages in here. So I'm just going to take a quick peek at what I have in this. Yeah, I guess Office is the only thing I have. At this point, after Office is done, this is where you would install all the applications that you put in your base image. And so I'm just going to run the setup.exe with configure, which is actually going to install Office 365 using that XML file that I have pre-created. Now that Office is installed, we can go in and clean up that Office ODT folder. When you run the download switch, it creates this folder that has the installers. Now that we've actually installed it, we don't need this anymore, and I think it could be around 3 gigs. So we're just going to do a shift delete and remove that off the system. And just because we installed a large application, we're going to go ahead and restart the VM. And for our sake, in this scenario, I'm going to say that we're completed installing all the base application images, or sorry, all the base applications on the Golden Image. So we're going to pretend that in this environment, the only application that's required is Office 365. So we've completed that requirement. And so now we can move on to using the OSOT, the Operating System Optimization tool, to optimize the image. And we will be optimizing it, generalizing it, finalizing it, and then performing some other actions before we can actually shut it down, export it, import it, create a snapshot, and push it. So what we can do now is, I'm just going to check one other thing here quickly. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump into that folder. And one thing that's really important, and this is inside of the TechZone article, is that when you download the LGPO and the SDelete, you always have to right click on them, go to properties, and notice how underneath security it says that the file came from another computer. You need to unblock this, or the OSOT tool will not be able to call these functions, which will result in your image not being fully 100% optimized. And so now that we've unblocked those, we can kick off the OSOT tool. So for the first part, we're going to analyze. And then we're going to use the trusty common options here. This is a nice little button that allows you to choose very commonly selected options so that you don't have to go in and manually create your own optimizations. So for example, here we're going to leave it on balance mode. We're going to disable hardware acceleration because we don't have a vGPU in this environment that we're deploying this image into. I'm going to uncheck disable notifications. We're confirming that Windows updates will be disabled. We're leaving search the way it is. Now, the OSOT tool by default removes all the Windows Store applications. Now, you need to remember and keep in mind that the command prompt now runs from terminal, which is an AppX package. The snippet tool is an AppX package. The calculator is an AppX package. Photos is an AppX package. So if you leave this default setting where it removes all the Windows Store applications, your users will not have anything that's listed below here. So in our environment, we want to make sure that the users can use alarm and clocks. We want them to use the calculator, web extensions, screen sketch, which is the snippet tool. We want to let them use their sticky notes. We currently at present do not have Teams installed on this image, but we're going to check this because we want to make sure that in the future when we optimize the image again, it won't remove Teams. We're also going to leave camera just in case if they want to use the camera, paint, photos, and sound recorder. So in our case, we're actually removing everything except for what we have checked below here. And for the rest of the settings, we can leave as default. Now I'm going to export these selections. And what this does is, because you should always optimize the image whenever doing maintenance, I like to create a JSON file that has my instant clone optimizations. And this way in the future, when you go to optimize your image again, you can just hit Analyze, import selections, and then optimize, so you don't have to go back and choose all the checkboxes. And now that we've made our selections, we've exported the JSON, I went ahead and clicked optimize on the bottom right, and the optimization process is happening as we speak. Now that the optimizations are completed, we'll get a little report here, and now we can head over to generalize the image. So we're going to set our time zone, and for the most part, we don't have to change anything else unless if you need to change your system locale. We're just going to flip the switch and turn on automatic restart, even though I've noticed that there's been a bug. I think it started with either 23H2 or 24H2, where after generalizing, it actually won't restart. So you'll need to jump in and do it, but we'll see shortly here if we have to do it. Now this is something that's good to note here. Now normally this should be successful. However, you will on occasion have issues with generalizing your VM. So it's kind of good that this actually came up. It was saying that there was pending file renames or writes that were needed to be completed on restart. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're actually going to close out of the OSOT tool, and we're going to do a restart. And we're going to try this again. Now there's a possibility that by restarting this VM, it may deploy some AppX packages on restart, which we don't want to happen before finalization, because that's another thing that can actually stop generalization from functioning. So just to be safe, I'm going to restart the entire process of optimizing, then going to generalization, and then finalization. And this is also going to give us the perfect example for me to show you. Now that we have that JSON file created, we can hit Analyze. And instead of having to go into common options, I can hit import selections, and I can choose that optimizations file that I created earlier, which loads the settings, and now I can just hit optimize. And so now that we've re-optimized the image, we'll head over to Generalize. set its mountain time, check automatic restart, and this time, fingers crossed, generalization should complete successfully. There's other scenarios that can cause these issues. For example, if you decided to leave all Apex packages and not remove any of the Windows Store apps, generalization would most likely probably fail due to applications. So if you are ever in an environment where you need to keep a whole bunch of Windows Store applications, where you would have chosen different settings from what we did with removing the Windows Store apps, you'll most likely need to go into your sysprep log files when generalization fails. You'll need to identify which Apex packages are causing problems. You'll need to remove them from all users and then remove them from being provisioned, which would then allow a successful generalization. Normally with instant clones, most of the Windows Store apps generally get removed just because of best practices and they're not required inside of business environments. So normally that scenario and issue doesn't really happen. However, when we start talking about persistent VMs, in those environments, a lot of IT departments and users like to have all their Apex packages and don't want to touch the Windows stores. So those are scenarios where you would most likely not remove any Windows Store apps and run into issues with generalization and have to jump in manually and remove and clean some of those up for successful deployment. And so it looks like generalization just ran. It's probably doing some cleanup right now. And this is one of the bugs that I've seen with Windows 24H2, is that after generalization and sysprep is completed, the system actually doesn't restart. So in this scenario, we are going to give it 1 to 2 minutes. And if it doesn't restart, we're going to do it manually. And actually, since it hasn't, I'm just going to go ahead and restart the VM right now. You'll notice that when the golden image comes back up, it's going to do some of the first-time initialization out of the box with Windows 11. That's because sysprep was just ran during the generalization process. And you'll also notice that the sysprep toolbox that kept on appearing on every startup of the golden image will now disappear and won't bug us anymore. You'll notice that post-generalization, it may take a couple minutes for the start menu and the taskbar to appear. One other thing that I want to point out too is that because we just ran sysprep, there are Apex packages getting deployed. So again, this is one of those scenarios that even though the VM might look like it's ready, once we get a full screen load, including the taskbar and the start menu, I might actually recommend letting the VM sit for 2, 3, 4 minutes just for Apex provisioning to complete and anything else that happens post sysprep. Okay, so we've got the taskbar. I've given it about 1 minute. I'm just gonna jump into the task manager to make sure that the VM is not too busy. Looks like there's not a lot of stuff going on. And so we should be good to finalize the base image now. So note that day 2 updates and feature maintenance, you will use different configurations of these checkboxes for maintenance cycles. But since this is the first time that we are performing optimization, generalization, and finalization of this golden image, we need to choose the options that are relevant for a first-time run of finalization. So we're going to do the NGen native image generator cleanup, optimization of .NET, side-by-side component cleanup. I'm going to uncheck compact just because I don't want any of the Windows operating system to be compressed. Before choosing any of these options, you should read up the TechZone articles and get versed with what these options do. As depending on what you currently have deployed in your environment, you may or may not want to have some of these checked. So we're going to clean the system event logs. We're going to disable superfetch, clean the default user profile. We're going to zero empty disk space. This is going to take up quite a bit of time, but what this is going to do is zero out and release free disk space back to the hypervisor. So when, for example, with that Office installer that we had, that was around 3.4, 3.8 gigabytes, we deleted it. However, we need to release that back to the VM. And so by running sdelete, which this option calls out to, that will free up the disk space, mark it as clear, and when we export this VM to a OVF or an OVA, when we re-import it, the re-imported golden image that we actually used to deploy to the Horizon environment will only use real space. We won't be consuming any free or empty disk space. And then we'll just use the rest of the settings here are good for us to continue. And finalization will take some time to complete. And so now finalization is completed. And so at this point, you could, if you were using app volumes inside of your environment, you would install the app volumes agent. Any other last minute customizations that you have to do. If you were using third-party antivirus products, for example, Sophos Intercept X, you would have to do your image, you'd have to do your installation and sealing process for Sophos at this point. One other thing that I forgot to mention too is that earlier, just before we started installing Office, I mentioned that you can install the DEM agent. That would apply if you were using DEM for user settings persistence. If you were using something like FSLogix, you could install the FSLogix agent at that point, or you could even do it now where we're currently sitting inside the image. So now that finalization is completed, we are good to go to proceed to the next steps. So we're going to issue a shutdown command, and you may have been noticing me using the command prompt to shut down earlier. One thing I want to mention is that with Windows 10 and Windows 11, if you go to start and then shut down, there's a high possibility that it might actually perform a hybrid shutdown, which is where it unloads the operating system and then puts the Windows kernel into hibernation for a faster startup on subsequent boot ups. Now, we don't want that with VDI because that can cause issues with optimization, finalization, and a whole bunch of other processes. So I've made it a habit, both when I'm doing day 2 maintenance, installing updates, that I actually use the command prompt to use, for example, right now, since we're finalizing, we're using shutdown/s, which means shutdown, /t0 means a timer of 0, which means immediate, and then /c means comment, and I'm giving it the comment of image ready. The reason why I'm doing this is because in the future when we actually deploy this, let's say that an IT administrator needs to come back and troubleshoot the process from image creation or image sealing to clone prep to everything beyond, they'll be able to look back inside of the event viewer and see that the system was shut down with the comment image ready, which will give them a point in reference in their troubleshooting. So it's just always handy to do this. So I'm going to issue this command. We're going to shut this VM down. And now what we're going to do is we're going to optimize the hardware for deployment. So we're going to right click on this VM and I'm going to give it 4 vCPU because we're getting ready to push this to prod. We're going to set the memory to 8. We're going to remove both CD-ROMs because they're not required. We're also going to remove the USB controller. And we're also going to remove the SATA controller. And that'll leave us with a very clean golden image that just has the CPU, the memory, the disk, SCSI controller, network adapter, because we want to have it as clean as possible. And so now the next step is we need to export the virtual machine to an OVF template. And this is, I think this is covered inside of the TechZone article. So what this does, again, I mentioned it earlier on in the video, that this will allow us to reclaim any empty disk space. So when we export this to OVF, we will then delete this VM inside of vSphere once we've fully exported it, and then we'll re-import that OVF so that the new golden image will only consume actual disk space that's required. And we'll just let that download run. Now, a couple things to note is that when you're actually running this download, you may notice that it runs at a fast pace for some period of time, and then it might actually look like the download is stalling. And that's because the ESXi host has identified empty disk space, and it's not actually transferring it. So as you monitor the download of this OVF, the VMDK, and the other files, it'll appear that it's stalling out, but it's actually not. It's just skipping over empty space. Another thing too is that you want to make sure that, I believe that there's 4 files that it downloads. There's the OVF, the VMDK, the MF file, which is a manifest file, and then an NVRAM file. Now, I've noticed that in some cases, the .mf file, the manifest file, can take a few minutes to actually start downloading it. And so I've had customers that have actually gone to export the VM, and they get 3 files, think that it's all done because nothing happens. They delete the original VM from vSphere, and then when they go to import, they're missing that MF file, which means that they can't actually import it, and they have to start the entire process. So if you grab 3 files, always give it 5 minutes, keep an eye on your browser, and make sure that the MF file starts to download, because you will need all 4 to import. Okay, so it's been a little while. However, we have the files now. You'll notice the 4 files. We have the VMDK, we've got the MF, the OVF, and the NVRAM, and the VMDK is about 12.4 gigabytes. So it's hefty in size. Like, it took a good 15 minutes to download, which I sped through. So now that we have these files, the next step is that we are actually supposed to delete the golden image. And we are now going to deploy an OVF template. And once we choose those 4 files, we're going to continue. We're just going to leave all the settings the same. And we're going to get a warning message telling us that there's some potential security risks, I think it says, because we exported all the advanced settings, which is fine. It's expected. And here's the message. And so we'll just hit next, choose a data store, set it to thin provision. We're going to choose our network and let that deploy. So the OVF import is complete, and now all we have to do is go to our image. We're just going to create a snapshot. Give it a description. Leave our initials. And that's it. At this point, you've created an image, you've exported it, imported it, installed the Horizon agent, got all your software loaded up, and you've optimized the hardware, snapshotted it, and you are now ready to deploy it to Omnissa Horizon. So essentially you would either go in and either modify an existing pool, preferably you'd create a new pool if it's a new image, and configure it to be a non-persistent instant clone. You would then choose the snapshot that we're pushing. And the very critical important item is that you need to check the checkbox stating add a vTPM to the instant clones. What this will do is when clone prep runs and starts deploying the instant clones, when the instant clones are created, it will automatically attach a vTPM. So for this to function, you do have to have something like vSphere NKP, native key provider, in place. I'll put a link in the description to my blog post covering that, so that you have the ability to actually create vTPM devices. But all in all, this is the essentially a summary, brief, end-to-end deployment guide for how to create and deploy a Windows 11 image. If you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out. Please check out my tech blog if you haven't, stephenwagner.com, STEPHEN Wagner.com. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I'm also the president of Digitally Accurate Inc. We're an Omnissa partner. We have clients worldwide that we help out with their VDI deployments in whole sorts of different industries and different customer sizes, with up to, I think we have some customers that have 5,000 desktops. Anyways, feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions or require any assistance. Thanks for watching. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments on the YouTube video or as a comment on my blog post. Thanks everyone, and I hope you have a great day.